Hey, tonight we're going to be talking about solving percent problems using proportions. Last night we talked about solving percent problems using multiplication, moving the decimal 2 places over to the left, and then multiplying. We also talked about solving problems using mental math, understanding 10%, 1%, 50%, and 100%. So let's first look at our proportion. We have is over of equals percent over 100, where the percent is always out of 100. And let's look at our first example and see how that proportion works. So we have 30% of 60 is what number? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our proportion. We're going to have one of our fractions being out of 100. So the first thing to fill in, which is the easiest, is going to be what goes over 100. Since our percent is always out of 100, that's what's going to be on the top. So obviously 30% is given. So we put 30% out of 100. Then we want to look for keywords that are going to help us figure out what goes on the left side. So right away I see of 60. So of 60, the word of tells us it's on the bottom. So 60 goes on the bottom. And then we look at my other keywords. Is what number? So we don't know what that is. So then we read it from left to right. We say what number is 30% of 60. So then I want you, before we actually start solving it, to actually think about it logically. 100% is talking about the 60. So that tells us that 100% is representing the whole. So that means that 60% is the whole. So 30% is going to represent the part. And that 30% is going to talk about the number that's on the top. So logically, you should be thinking 50% of 60 is 30. So if I need to know 30%, it's going to be a lot less than 30. So how we solve proportions, we use cross multiplication. So we're going to say x times 100 is 100x is equal to 30 times 60 is 1800. So now we have my equation. We're going to divide both sides by 100. Cross out the 2 zeros, cross out the 2 zeros. So we have 18 over 1. So x is 18. So we fill it in, and we say 18 is 30% of 60, which makes sense. Let's look at our next problem. We have what percent of 92 is 23. So right off the bat, we set up our proportion out of 100. So the first thing I want you getting used to solving or setting up is what goes out of 100 first. So since we don't know the percent, that's what we're going to put over 100. So that's going to be x. And again, we want to look for keywords. So we see of 92. So the of goes on the bottom. And then we see is 23. So the is on the top. So 23 is what percent of 92. So again, logically, you should be thinking that 92 represents 100%, which is the whole. So 23 is going to represent what percent? So mentally, you should be thinking that 50% of 92 is 46. And then 23 is actually half of, if we divide by 2, is half of 46. So if 23 is half of 46, and 46 is 50%, then half of 50% represents 25%. So just to make sure we're doing it right, we cross multiply. 23 times 100 is 2300. 92 times x is 92x. Divide both sides by 92. Divide by 92. And x does equal 25%. So we look at our next example. So try setting that one up on your own. Put it out of 100 first. So again, the easiest thing to fill in is what goes over 100, because that's always going to represent the percent. Look for your keywords. Of goes on the bottom. So x goes on the top. Then this one's a little bit different than the last two that we've done. Since 95 is representing 100%, which is the whole, this top percentage is talking about the x. Well, this top percentage is 120%, which is more than 100%. So that should tell you something about what that number is going to be. So logically, I already know that if that percentage is more than 100%, then this top number will be more than 95. So again, you solve it by doing cross products. 100 times x is 100x. 120 times 95 is 11,400. Divide both sides by 100. These two cross out, so we have 114. So that means that 114 is 120% of 95, which again makes sense because 114 is bigger than 95, and 95 represents 100%. And we'll do one more like this. Set up our proportion. First thing you should fill in is what goes over 100. So that's what we don't know. So that is your x. Then you want to look for keywords. Of 30, of goes on the bottom. 24 is goes on the top. So 24 is what percent of 30? So again, 30 is representing the 100%. So since 24 is less than 30, then your percentage should be less than 100%. So you can go ahead and solve it by doing cross products, and you would get an answer of 80%, which makes sense. And our last problem. Let's say I assign 25 problems for homework. You've done 60% of them. How many problems have you done? So if you did all of the problems, you would have done 100% of the problems. But you've only done 60%. So that tells us that we're going to be doing more than 50%, but less than 100%. So a couple different ways we can solve it, but we're going to use proportions tonight. So right away, I set up my proportion out of 100. First thing you fill in is what goes over 100, which is 60. So you want to find out 60% of the 25 questions. So the of 25 would go on the bottom. And again, since that 25 is representing the whole entire test, that goes on the bottom next to 100%. So if you read it left to right, what number is 60% of 25? So go ahead and do your cross products, and you solve it. And you would get 15 questions that you have done. So if you've completed 60% of the questions, what percent did you not complete? So I can extend this problem to say the percentage that you did not complete is 40% out of 100. So 40% of 25 questions is how many questions? So here's another proportion you could have set up. So what is 40% of 25 total questions? So obviously 25 minus 15 is going to give you 10 questions. It's very important to make sure that you answer the correct question, because I could have simply thrown in the word not, and it would have changed the problem completely. So now, to sum up what we've done the past 2 days, we've solved percent problems using mental math, we've solved percent problems using multiplication, and now we've solved percent problems using proportions.